I think I have listened to the president over a long time, and even from the time when he took over the first statement he made, the first acceptance speech he gave in 2013. This speech was much more focused, and I think he was very, very aware, very alive to the realities of the divisions that bedeviled this country. And I think he spent a bit of time trying to explain the reality of how he wants to approach it. Because for several, I think he made use of the word the rule of law several times. He stated continuously repeating that everything is going to be solved or approached.
Ultimately, it's going to be about the rule of law. I'll come back and talk about that. Honorable Namamba.
Thank you for saying. First of all, of course, at a very personal level, I'm happy that finally there is what you may call constitutional closure in terms of a process that has been long drawn, and it has had the country on tenterhooks. Perhaps that mood of uncertainty was best illustrated in the words of President Edgar Lungu, the Zambian president, when in his very brief remarks he told Kenyans, "We've been worried about you." We've been concerned about the state of uncertainty in the country, and that is true because everybody has wanted some form of closure to this process. You cannot have an electoral contest going on for eternity, forever. So first of all, I just want to reiterate the fact that it's good for the country that you have a measure of closure in constitutional terms. Now, for me, two things stood out in the president's speech. One was his very firm reiteration or affirmation that Kenya is a constitutional democracy. And as a constitutional democracy, we must anchor all our actions on the rule of law. We may disagree, we may contest, we may engage in all sorts of competition, but at the end of the day, what distinguishes us from the jungle is the rule of law. And listen to these words. Let me just quote very, very briefly. He says, and I quote him, "However serious our grievances, the law must reign supreme. The law should be the refuge for every Kenyan. None of us should break outside the law or constitutional order, whatever our grievances or protestations." And he goes ahead to illustrate his commitment to that by saying, "For those in doubt, let me remind you, when a foreign court, the ICC, demanded compliance of us, despite our serious misgivings about the process, we complied." And he goes on also to remind us that when the Supreme Court ruled against him on September 1st, he complied. And so he goes on actually to remind Kenyans that whatever the case, the stability of this country will, at the end of the day, the bottom line will be our restating and our commitment to uphold the rule of law and the Constitution. That for me stands out very clearly. And the second thing is that he wants to move very quickly to go to his agenda for the country. And that's why he took time to outline the vision, basically restating the vision he has for the country, and even went on to say that the competition, this contest was not between persons or communities, it was between visions. Those were his words.
Right.
It was between visions, and he even said he wouldn't mind borrowing what is good in the vision of his rivals to drive the country forward.
And he said actually still, because you're right, he spent a large part of his speech talking about the rule of law and constitutionalism. Again, and I will quote him, he said, "This administration has demonstrated by its actions its readiness to live and lead by the rule of law. By extension, we expect nothing less from each and every citizen," adding to what you said.
Yes.
So looking at what he said, Daisy, the president said, and from where we are coming from, as much as it's going to reach out, he's still saying it will be within the confines of the law. How is that going to work out?
Well, for starters, I think part of one of the confines of the rule of law is also allowing for everybody to exercise their freedom of association and freedom of movement, which we saw being curtailed. So we also saw some contradictions. While he was committing to constitutionalism and the rule of law, we saw the violations of that, you know, against the persons who opted, you know, to engage differently. But having said that, in his speech, one of the things that he did say as two of his principal objectives, the first one, he said, was to strengthen the ties that bind us. But I think he also set parameters. He put on the table what is not negotiable. He reiterated that the political contest is over, the electoral contest is over, which tells us that you know, there has been push for dialogue. And when we hear what the opposition are demanding by way of dialogue, they are talking about dialogue towards a fresh election. And what the president said yesterday, that is not on the table. And he made that very clear.
He actually repeated it.
Yes, he repeated it. Therefore, so he has also set the parameters of what he is willing to talk about. He's willing to talk about how do we bridge the political divide, how do we heal the nation. But there are these non-negotiables, or let's say irreducible minimums for him. One, we're not going into an election anymore. The electoral contest is over. And the presidency is also not up, you know, for grabs, because that process has come to an end yesterday, and he has been, a president has been effectively sworn in.
Is that good or bad to you? Is that negative or positive?
I think that's fine, because, you know, when you're going into negotiations, it's important to come with your, you know, NASA, the opposition have their demands, and he's saying, look, I am willing to talk, but this is his irreducible minimum, in the sense that we're not opening this up. And that's good, because when you're coming to, when the opposition are now coming to the table, because they have also signaled a willingness to talk, at least they know that these are these areas are not open for discussion. So he's made it very clear, and I think that for me is a good thing, because at least you know where he stands on this issue.
Right. Steve?
Thanks for saying. Allow me first to make a preambular statement which will provide inspiration and perhaps direction to my contribution on this panel. We love this country, and we care that Kenya should rise while preserving its reputation as a democracy. Part of that reputation includes the perception that the international community has about this country in the just concluded electoral process. Talking of democracy, Hussein, democracy is not just about the election. And indeed, we said many times that the judicial process that just concluded, you know, the Supreme Court dispute resolution about the questions as to the validity and legality of the election will not necessarily resolve all the outstanding issues. So it would be naive for anyone to think that because now we have a president duly elected, validated at the Supreme Court, sworn in, and now ready to lead the country, we should sweep every other concern under the table and move forward to discuss development agenda. In fact, the precursor to development, if I'm trying to contextualize what Uhuru Kenyatta said yesterday, is that we must assess whether Kenya has truly met the preconditions for takeoff. And most important is that, do we have a shared and settled understanding of our development of a shared national identity? Because once we have a shared national identity, the things that divided us, and we have settled them, including electoral-related issues, only then can we then begin to interrogate the issues that he spoke about yesterday. And for me, Uhuru Kenyatta did not conclusively or comprehensively address all the emerging issues. Remember, right now, we have a country that does not believe in the legitimacy of his presidency. We are not talking about the legality, because nobody is doubting the fact that Kenya has a president. But let me tell you, Hussein, Martin Luther King once said, and without, let me paraphrase him without benefiting from his eloquence, he said that sometimes you know what your friends think by their silence. Not just putting preeminence on the words of your enemies. Forget about what people could say in criticizing Kenya. what are your friends saying by their silence? When you look at the international perception about Kenya, a country that is unable to hold election that is considered, in terms of perception, to be free and fair, a country that is holding an election with one of the leading commissioners resigning in a very dramatic fashion and fleeing the country, now those issues must emerge.
Okay.
Because they'll help us to contextualize the problems for purposes of bringing closure. Closure, Hussein, will not be brought by legality alone. It is the conversation, what is it that Akombe saw that made her took off? What is it that Chebukati saw 7 days to the election that made him say he's not ready to preside over that election? What is it that ultimately he saw which made us now move to the election? All these questions, what is it that NASA is seeing that has not been conclusively addressed, and how can we harmonize all these thoughts, deal with them, before then we can say, now we are ready, truly ready to move into discussing development. For me, before we deal with these processual issues, Hussein, we will just be going around in circles, and NASA has already shown us that it has the capacity to disrupt the order of government if these issues are not addressed.
So many people already itching to respond to you, but first let me get Mutegi.
I totally disagree with this young man here, but I will not deal with those hypotheses that he has. I think, to me, having you people dealt with politics or elections, I think, to me, the most important thing is the projection of what the president said he wants to do. Say, for instance, allowing people to come to Kenya without having any, you get a visa at the airport. East Africans want to come here, they just bring about education, about health, all those things to me are the ones that matter. That brings me hope. That brings hope that he is going to make the country better in terms of economic growth. Whether some people recognize him or not, it is relevant. The president was sworn in yesterday, and it is business if he extends a hand of welcome. And then some people say they don't recognize him. What can he do?
So
there must be losers in elections. Okay. There must be losers.
I know what Mutegi is saying, but I think we need to be very careful. The president himself is cognizant of the fact that a lot of his plans moving forward hinge on the unity of Kenya as a people. And he has not run away from that fact. So we cannot talk about economic growth and economic empowerment if you don't have all hands on deck. So the issue of dialogue, the issue of unity cannot be swept away. Also, please remember that having a president sworn in is not the end of the contestation, because if you recall, in 2007 we had a president who was sworn in. He even formed cabinet, and a few months down the line he was negotiating a different cabinet, and all hell had broken loose. So while we are in uncharted waters, and some of the issues that Steve has raised are of a concern, where we've never had a situation where the leading opposition have boycotted an election, and we've never had a situation where we're talking about the people's assemblies.
Did boycott elections.
No, I'm talking about in Kenya.
Matiba is a Kenyan. He
boycotted elections.
Yes.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
We continued. Elections were held and government was formed.
So the thing is, we have this issue of the people's assemblies. So for me, I think it is important that we do not just try to sweep some of these things under the carpet. There is a lot of disaffection, and the president is alive to that, and he has extended a hand and he's saying, listen, let's talk. The challenge here is this: are there enough incentives across the board to actually bring people to the table so that they start talking?
Okay. Honorable Mambo, I'll come to you, Mr. President.
Hussein, we can sit here until the kingdom come and engage in polemics and dialectics of Plato, Aristotle, Leo Tolstoy, Galileo Galilei, Leonardo da Vinci, all of them. But the brutal reality that we cannot run away from is that we have a constitution, and constitutionally speaking, this contest is over. Finito. It's done. The electoral contest 2017 is done.
Why would you say constitutionally speaking?
Constitutionally speaking, because it is the Constitution that sets the beacons, the parameters.
And that has been met.
And all those parameters have been met. Let me conclude, Hussein.
No, I'm just asking, you're qualifying your statement by saying, your remarks by saying constitutionally speaking, because what you're saying, and you can respond to this, what you're saying is there's still something else that hasn't been met?
No, Hussein. Maybe I need to rephrase this and simply say, remember I started off by saying, we are a constitutional democracy. And in a constitutional democracy, there is no other yardstick for measuring, even all these words we bandy around, legality, legitimacy. The ultimate yardstick is the Constitution. And for instance, the act of swearing in a president that we witnessed yesterday is clearly set out in Article 141 of the Constitution. Who can be sworn in? Who will preside over the swearing in? The whole process, which is then amplified in the Assumption of Office to Office of the President Act. And all these things really are anchored on the Constitution. So constitutionally speaking, whether you talk about the election itself, the conclusion of that process, the legal challenge to that process, which we witnessed not once, but twice, through the Supreme Court, the determination of that contest, the declarations thereafter, and the swearing in terms of Article 141 of the Constitution, there is constitutional closure on this matter.
Steve talks about legitimacy, and in terms of whether it diminishes the legitimacy of the president, in that there are millions of Kenyans who also did not turn up to vote, boycotting the election.
Hussein,
does it do anything according to you?
There has been an attempt to split hairs and say there is something called legal legitimacy and then there is political legitimacy. For me, legitimacy can only be defined within the context of the Constitution. And as far as I'm concerned, President Uhuru Kenyatta has met all those requirements, constitutionally speaking. And therefore, the question of legitimacy of this government is not in question.
So is it
absolutely not in question. But let me conclude this. Let me conclude by saying that I agree with Daisy that the president himself is alive to the fact that he has an agenda for this country. He does not want distractions. In fact, when he spoke, I think it was in Kirinyaga the other day, he said he has a job to do. He should be led to do this job for the next 5 years. And so I believe the president would want a conducive environment within which to do that job. And that's why yesterday he had no qualm saying any good ideas within the vision of the opposition are welcome to be part of the agenda he has for this country. But I think even as the president reaches out to build bridges, and I think this is not the first time the president will be doing this, to be fair to him, after the 2013 elections, the president went out of his way. We saw the president basically all over. He combed every length and breadth of this country. He was in Migori, he was in Busia, he was in Kilifi. He reached out to zones which, in fact, had rejected him holistically in 2013. And I believe that he wishes to build on that agenda of reaching out.
Okay.
But I don't believe, Hussein, as I conclude, I don't believe the president is reaching out because he believes that there is a deficit of legitimacy in his government. There is absolutely no deficit of legitimacy for the government of Uhuru Kenyatta.
I think, yes, we agree with all these things, but I think the bottom line is this. Let us look at something as a journalist, something I call reality check. And the reality check here, the constitutionalism aside, the legal aspects aside, the fact that the president has been sworn in aside, the reality is that Kenya has a divide. And this divide is that one side is sitting on one edge of the river, which is normal, and the other side is sitting on the other edge. And what we have to do, regardless of whether we support the Jubilee side or whether we support the court side, the challenge we have in Kenya today is to make sure that we cannot close our eyes to the reality that there are people out there who are crying about certain grievances the president alluded to. The president said there are grievances, whatever.
In which country, Museveni, in which country
now,
did we have
just
elections?
listen, Muteki.
In which country did we have elections where there are no divisions?
Now, what we are saying is this.
Sorry,
now, what we are saying is
Which
this.
country?
The challenge now is to bridge the divisions. We have been talking about the reality that Kenya has divisions. We have been talking about the reality that, in fact, 2013, when I was discussing this matter on a television, national television lecture, people talked about the rule of law, that now we have the rule of law, nothing will go out, nothing will go wrong. But when I came out of the station, the country was on fire. Now the president had been sworn in. So what we think, what we must now do is to address the realities. The realities are that this country needs healing. And that this country is healing now with the president sworn in. The issues of legitimacy or illegitimacy aside, the president being sworn in must guide the process of healing this country.
Okay.
So that we, I think the point to make is this. If we are all standing on one side of the political divide and the other one saying, we have made it, we do not need to talk. The other one saying, we must talk because we have grievances. Then where are we going to go take this country to?
Okay. I'll come to you. I mean, let's just get a quick break here. And I'll read a text here from Sam Macharia, who says, the truth of the matter is the election process came to an end yesterday. Conclusively, he says, all these legitimacy issues cannot be ascertained by politicians. They costed their job. We need to move on as a country. That is on 22422. A tweet here from Nancy Kondi, who says the only way here is by having national dialogue. You know we Kenyans are divided because our leaders are. The moment they come together, nothing will stop us from being one. However, election fraud should be solved as well. As a Kenyan, I feel left out since I did not vote. Keep talking to us. The hashtag is Cheche on Twitter. Text us on 22422. Musebe is talking about still need to heal this country. But already we are seeing another problem where the president has made it very clear. The electoral process is over. So we are back to where we are because the opposition, again, has always insisted if there are going to be any talks, they have to be on the electoral process. So how do we go from there? We are back after this break.